Should we do an intro of any kind?
I mean, what's an intro anymore in today's world? Do we even need an intro?
I mean, this is technically an intro right now.
I guess
This is
that's
as close
fine.
as this show's gonna get because this
I
is
mean, it
literally
was that was
rambling.
the it was the idea in the first place. Was this the no context conversation about film, right?
Just conversation. It can have
Yeah.
context, but it'll happen as we talk. Not
We'll figure out the tagline after we finish talking, kind of thing.
popcorn
It
on
was
the floor of the theater. Should you eat it or shouldn't you? Are you pro or against, Darren?
I'm pro. I'm
There you
pro.
go. There you go. It's
Yeah.
already buttered. So you said you wanted to talk about something. Let's talk. What is it?
So that time travel film you liked back in the day, the one you made me watch,
Grand
the
Tour.
one with yeah, I think that we should talk about that. I
You
think
want
that
to
would
talk
be
about
the
Grand
best
Tour?
way to I feel like yeah, Grand Tour. I think it was a good film. I think that the funny part with our conversation about it is that no one's really watched it. No one gives any credit. And as far as sequels go, we're going to get into sequels, I guess. But the reality is that movie was good as a one-off film. It could have had sequels.
I'm glad it didn't. I don't want sequels to that one.
That's fair. But so I guess I liked a lot about it, especially the ending. But I want to get your bigger take on the whole film. We loved it. It was really good. So
It's a film that when I saw it, and for those that don't know, it has two names. I believe the Blu-ray though is back to the original name, which is Grand Tour: Disaster in Time, and that is its
yep.
original title. But it also had a title of Timescape, I believe. That was later when nobody saw Grand Tour, and it may not be the best title, but honestly, it does pertain to the movie. There is a point to the title, and when I saw the film, I remember it was exactly what I told you that the the beginning of it you're kind of like what is this? And it takes a little getting into. Like it's not a movie that like leaps out at you right away. You have to invest a bit into this one. And that's because it sets up the characters, it sets up the location. The location is very important. And man, does it all pay off. That's what I love about that movie. Like, okay, you got a slow start, but everything you're introduced to has a payoff and it has a big heart. And more people should see the movie. It's and Jeff Daniels is fantastic in it.
I'd say it's one of like his best performances as far as the things that got forgotten. I feel like he did this, and then next thing we know he did was really what Dumb and Dumber.
Dumb and
So
Dumber,
I
I
think
think, yeah. But he did a lot of
yeah.
movies back then, so it's hard to say.
Well, he was a comedian first, right? So this is a
No,
pretty dramatic
He
role.
was a dramatic
Yeah.
actor, but he was always good at comedy, like always.
Yes.
So I like what one critic said about Dumb and Dumber. I think he nailed it perfectly. That Jim Carrey did a comedy performance, and he was constantly doing a comedy performance. That's not a negative. That's just his observation. And then he said, but Jeff Daniels was acting, and you believed he was a complete and utter idiot. And he meant that in a very positive way. That he played a dumb guy, and it was perfect.
And back to Timescape, though, I think that it gave him like a heroic position. Like I've never seen him play a role that was so good. Like seeing an actor, especially one that you know for comedy, a lot of people would probably come in seeing Timescape now, never having, well, knowing him for being comedic, right? Knowing him for those kinds of
They're
films.
gonna
But
know him
this is
more
like
for the comedy. Yeah, they're probably gonna
absolute.
your mainstream audiences. That is.
So I think this is a highlight. If you like him at all, I think that maybe some of his newer films have added credence to his likability. So if you come back to here, you have a lot of love towards the character, a lot of love towards um, Jeff Daniels' character. I don't know his, I don't really remember the character's
Well,
name.
yeah, we don't have the just so
Yeah,
people know, we don't have the IMDb pulled up or anything. This is just a conversation from our minds,
yeah.
and yeah, I don't remember the character's name, and it has been a long time since I've seen it. Actually, you were talking about time travel movies one night, because one of your favorites, if I may bring it up, is Back to the Future. That's like one of
Yeah.
your all-time favorite movies, and so we started talking time travel, and then I asked you, "Oh, have you ever seen Grand Tour?" And you're like, "What the hell's that?" So, like,
I had no idea. Yeah,
yeah, nobody had heard of this film. Well, that's not true. I hate when people say that, but it's a way of saying mainstream audiences didn't find this movie, and it's a terrible title. And even though Jeff Daniels, he's one of those guys that's well known, but he's not necessarily a movie draw. You know what I mean? He's not the guy, unless you're really a fan. And I am a fan. I like his work. I like him. So
He's very likable in this whole film, story wise,
and it's an arc.
storytelling. Like,
He has a
yeah,
personal arc in the story. You know, I don't
I
want to
think
give
the I
anything
think
away. But
I want to say the whole grand scheme of it is if you want to go into a film that has a good beginning, middle, and end, maybe a little slow at the beginning, but then really pays off the last two thirds. This film is that, and then has a very rewarding finale.
so we talked about Grand Tour. Highly recommend it. I think it's worth watching. It's a good choice. Where should we go from here?
Well, we're going to talk about some sequels we thought were really good coming out of the 80s, right? 80s to 90s sequels that were of the top tier. I think this is a topic that a lot of people already kind of know a lot about, but I feel like we could bring some more credence to a lot of interesting sequels people wouldn't think about.
I don't
More
know. I
often
mean,
than
I
not.
don't have a list. As I said, we didn't prep. This is off the cuff.
Well,
But the thing I want to talk about too, it was sequels, is there are perplexing sequels.
that's
There
true too.
there are sequels you kind of go, what? Like, I mean, the obvious one we could go to right now would be like something like The Last Jedi. And I don't want to go on a Star Wars tangent. Everybody talks about Star Wars. But I mean, it is in that area where you go, what were you thinking? And there were sequels way before that one where you're just like, people think of Aliens, right? You talk good sequel. If you talk good sequel, you think of Aliens. You think good remake, you think of The Thing, right? Or The Fly, or there's certain movies people's brains go immediately to. But you think of like Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan. That's a sequel. It's
Should have
it's
been the first movie.
it's well, I don't hate the first one. Let's get that clear. I don't hate the
No,
first
no.
movie. It's a science fiction. It does have thought provoking stuff, but it was not the way to bring people back to Star Trek after Star Wars had hit the theater. It just wasn't the right choice. And I think you could do good science fiction that's thought provoking and has action. Weirdly, to cross back to the other topic for a moment, one of my favorite movies of all time is a time travel movie called Time After Time. Malcolm McDowell, David Warner, directed by Nicholas Meyer, who, guess what he directed? Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan. And Time After Time is not a dumb movie. You've seen that one, right?
Well, that is I think that's a little predates our time maybe, but I've not seen it.
What do you mean it
It's a movie I need
predates
to
our
see.
time? I saw it in the theater, man.
You did? Okay.
Oh, yeah. It's the late
Well,
70s.
I haven't seen it,
Oh,
so
put that on your
I have
list.
not.
Trust me. Time After Time is a great premise. For those that are familiar with the classic time travel movie, The Time Machine, you'll know it was written by H.G. Wells, the original story, and this is a take on that, stating what if H.G. Wells, before he started being a writer, was this genius, and he actually built a time machine, and just supposing, because he was alive around the time of Jack the Ripper, the man who was Jack the Ripper was his best friend and actually escaped the police via the time machine. And now it is up to H.G. Wells to go forward in time to stop Jack the Ripper from killing in the future. And there's more to it than that because H.G. Wells believes the future's utopia. He doesn't see where we are going, and that's part of the plot. I don't want to give too much away, but he believes he's released a monster onto Utopia. And of course, that's not the truth. And so HD gets a very big wake up call to what he thought was going to be the future and essentially has to take on his best friend, who is Jack the Ripper.
When we
And
continue to have these conversations, we'll have to come back to it because I'm putting it. It's already earmarked on my short list, so we'll come back to it
yeah,
as
well,
a fronter to a future conversation.
how
So,
Nicholas Meyer got Star Trek 2
was
was
this
because
film?
of Time After Time. And Nicholas did not direct 3, 4, or 5. He came back for 6. But when he came back, he helped Leonard Nimoy do some writing for 3. And
Okay.
then when Nimoy, like part 3 was pretty big, they said, hey, Nimoy, direct part 4. And so Nicholas Meyer really was a guiding force. Him and Leonard Nimoy were guiding forces to where the sequels of Star Trek went until 5, and then we kind of all know what happened there. But let's talk Star Trek 2.
Yeah.
This isn't just a good sequel. This is a great sequel.
It's the best, maybe one of the best of all time. I think that's fair to
That
say.
is
Yeah.
not unfair. I mean,
Yeah.
I could make, oh boy, I'm going to make friends on this podcast. I could pick on some elements of Aliens when I rewatched it, and I was like, I still love it. Don't miss. I still love Aliens, but there were a few things I was like, well, that's kind of an odd choice. They're they're on a ship that's pretty much completely empty. The mothership. There's like no other people. It's this giant ship, and there's nobody else on board the ship.
The Sucro, where it's just like no one's there. Basically the giant shotgun in space.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It does look like a giant shotgun in space, and there's like nobody on board this thing. That was a little odd, but Aliens is one of those films that people always name off as a great sequel. But I'm saying Star Trek 2 isn't just a great sequel; it's a great film. You could not there were a lot of people I grew up with that never saw a single episode of Star Trek. They had no idea who like Ricardo Montalban was on Star Trek. They never saw the Space Seed episode, so they didn't know Khan at all, and so it didn't matter. You get introduced to Khan, they give you the information you need, and you are just off on, as Nicholas Meyer called it, Horatio Hornblower in space. And it's just a fantastic movie. And I saw Red Letter Media just recently said that it's not a great Star Trek thing because it's more action. I don't necessarily agree with that.
It feels like geopolitical slash submarine movie
Yes.
in a lot of ways, like an old school submarine movie in space, and some geopolitics around the ancillary parts, just like a classic submarine film.
Well,
Very similar. Yeah.
Nicholas Meyer and Gene Roddenberry's butted heads because Nicholas Meyer always said he saw the Federation as like the Navy, and Gene Roddenberry hated that, which is kind of funny when you consider Nicholas Meyer was involved with pretty much all the really good Star Trek films. So, I kind of agree with Nicholas a little bit more, but there's some bias involved in that.
It's a fair comparison. I think that Roddenberry probably was more concerned with like the overall tone and storytelling. He was always concerned with like how do we convey the best positive stories, the best like aspirational ideas behind humanity. He wanted his stories to be that positive. So being reduced to the Navy and military wasn't what he really wanted. He wanted to be something better in some ways. No offense to the military, but he wanted to be something that was like more aspirational, if you can imagine that, something beyond military in some ways, whatever that would be. He had those aspirations.
Well, he always considered the Enterprise a science ship. It was a science vessel, and obviously Mayer saw it more as a naval vessel. I mean, it had guns, so you need to protect yourself. And a lot of people have pointed out, if you watch the original Star Trek, there's a lot of horror, like because what are they going? Well, they're going into the unknown, and so you have to have that. How do I want to word this? I guess that potential of violence that's always going to be there because you're going to confront species that could be violent. Now, Star Trek 2 is about a personal battle and personal cost, personal price. Like, there's a lot about the choices we make and what effects they have in time.
Well, sacrifice, right? Like life, like goals, friends, the future, where you've been, where you're going, the whole like facsimile of what's your aspirations and what's the outcome going to be from that. I think a lot of films, especially in sequels, let go of the goal of like your characters are very important. Where are they going to go next, and how does it matter to them right now, and how are you going to make them grow beyond what they've been? It's very hard to do that, especially for a thing like Star Trek, right?
Well, I think that Star Trek, in a way, had to do what one of my other favorite franchises had to do, and that's James Bond. There are certain things you have to do to survive time. So every 10 years, you're just dealing with something new. James Bond has survived because it went to blaxploitation with Live and Let Die. It went to space with Moonraker because, of a little film called Star Wars. I think Star Trek needed to become action-oriented, at least to some degree. I just don't think it glorified violence. In fact, I think it was the opposite. I think it showed the consequences of violence. And then part three, and to a lesser degree, part six, also continue that idea, which were all Nicholas Mayer productions. Because that's what
Right.
Undiscovered Country is about, right? We have to say, if we don't do something, this people's going to die. The entire race is going to be gone, which of course leads to Kirk's famous line, "Let them die." But they had murdered his son, so he had a personal grudge. So he had to get beyond his personal feelings for that to happen. And that's wonderful because they had an excuse to shoot the Klingon ship, and he's the one that says, "Hold your fire." So there was always that angle of peace, and I think that's why I like Star Trek too. I don't need I don't need everything I watch to be Dirty Harry, or Star Wars, or I like that idea of being more. I think that's what Star Trek's always been about. Like, be better than, be better than yourself, be better than the past.
Just do the right thing for the future.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that in a lot of ways of storytelling is that it's about like today you feel this way that way, but what's the choice that's going to set up today and tomorrow to be a better today and tomorrow. I think that Roddenberry always wanted to make his stories about we're good today, we'll be better tomorrow. We can always improve and do better and have a better vision.
Agreed.
I think that stayed the course
Well,
across the
till a
board.
certain point. But
Well, I think that it stayed true at least until we got through Voyager for sure, as far as TV series
oh,
go, and Deep Space
definitely.
Nine. We kept
Yeah.
all that, and maybe even through Enterprise, honestly. In recent era, we've lost a lot of that vision, and we become more of that shoot 'em up, dirty Harry kind of thing has become a thing, and
Well,
emotions and
they
whatever.
wanted
Yeah,
Game of Thrones, and that's what Discovery's about. And again, I don't want to go off on those tangents. I think those topics have been talked to death, and I
different conversation for a different day,
it
for
is
sure.
it is. It's just back to the idea of sequels, where you look at. That's why I wanted to focus like on 2, 3, and 4, or excuse me, 2, 3, 4, and 6. I was leaving out
Yep.
four there. 2, 3, 4, and 6. There's a line of thinking, and that's why they're good sequels. They all kind of flow into each other. They
But isn't
just
that true with all
perfect.
sequels we like? That the
Well, the
sequels
good ones,
bring
yeah.
out positivity and hope and a good future and a good outcome and a good line of progression for your characters, for the audience, for new characters, even for the villains in some cases. I mean, we've seen a lot of villains go from being villains to heroes over the course of many iterations, and I think that that's a big part of storytelling. How do you evolve a character over the course of multiple movies? And back in the 80s and into the 90s, even some, or let's say late 70s even, because we know some movies conveyed, like came across, let's say, from the 70s into the 80s and 90s, they had to evolve a character that wasn't designed for that. Like that era wasn't planning for sequels in the late 70s, early 80s. That wasn't part of the
Mm,
zeitgeist, right?
well,
They weren't thinking about that so much. So,
this is a trick. This is a
yeah.
tricky part because if you go back, there were sequels to a lot of movies. It doesn't seem like it, but there were like 14, 15 Andy Hardy movies. Sequels are nothing new, but I think you're right to a degree also, because the type of sequels, I think, is what changed. Like, there's not like a necessary high level of quality or thought put into those sequels, the Andy Hardy films, or any of the other sequels. There's a few, but when James Bond hit, that was 60s, and you could call those sequels, the continuations, whatever you want to say. So how you define a sequel is a little tricky also. See, to me,
Well, a
Star
sequel
Trek
that's
are
truly a
sequels.
continuation, right? You think
Yes, that's
continuation?
how I
Yeah,
look at them.
sure, agreed. Yep.
Some people will say, well, it's just more of. And well, what? Tell you what. Let's switch gears. I want to talk about something that's really bothered me in sequels for
Okay.
years, and that's comedies. Sequels to comedies have the weirdest trait, and I've noticed it's not in all of them. Okay, if you look at Austin Powers, it has a sequel that's better than the original. Austin Powers 2 is funny. It is a really well done sequel. So I'm not saying this idea I'm about to state is exclusive. Like it,
It keeps the steamroller going, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
but that one is an exception to the rule. Whereas this other thing, like I remember seeing, I'm a big fan of a movie called Smokey and the Bandit. Pretty popular film, right? Wouldn't you say? That's a pretty well known movie.
I love both first and second movies are so much fun.
I do
The
too,
second one's very weird.
but the second one sets forth a trend that I started to notice in a lot of sequels. And I call it the poison pill.
The
And
sex orgy?
yeah, yes,
Oh,
the
I'm
sex
sorry.
orgy. Yes, definitely. That the scene with the elephant was just too much. I couldn't. No, no, of course not the sex orgy. The poison pill is that they make the bandit bitter and dark. Now, this is a comedy, and he's already worried about his legend. He's not the man he used to be. He's drinking too much. He makes bad choices, and it puts a bit of a cloud over the fun of the proceedings. Now, the film, I think, ultimately overcomes it. I do like the sequel. There are good things in it. I don't think it quite nails what it was aiming at. There are problems. The ending is not as strong as it could be. But in this case, the scene with all the semi trucks versus all those cop cars, I remember seeing that in the theater and it was a glorious spectacle. So even if you just went for that scene, it was worth the money. But that poison pill is something I've seen pop up in Ghostbusters 2. Ghostbusters 2. Well, where do we start the movie? Oh, they're disbanded. They're separated. The business has gone under. They're working birthday parties. Vinkman barely wants to talk to them. It's dark because they don't know where to start again. Like, we got to
I
start the
hate
whole
to
thing
say
over.
it, but that movie may be the best one that made the most sense with that, considering the we got sued by everyone and no one cared, and we had to pay for
But
everything. Like
is
they
that a
actually,
good idea for Ghostbusters, though? See,
I'm not saying it
a
is. At least
real
they
world, yes.
rationalized it, yeah, in a
Uh,
reasonable way. It's like, oh, well, but they were making a political statement. Again, politics and films became influential around that era, right? Where like we need to make a political
they never
statement too.
went
Maybe we didn't
away,
think.
I'd say.
Oh, well, it was really extreme back then, right? It was very pungent. Get sued for anything. It's our fault we did these things. It's our fault XYZ, right? Like it was a big part of filming back
I
then. Like,
I
yeah,
think they were
anyway,
lazy. I'm just gonna say it. I think it was
I'm not going to
lazy
defend them.
writing
Yeah.
because they wanted, like, all right, when you have, what are most comedies based on? They're based on the idea of an underdog, right? Not every comedy, of course, but they're based on an underdog. Smokey and the Bandit. You wanted to see the bandit win. You wanted to see him do what's no. That's what's in the song lyrics, right? We're gonna do what's never been done before. So you're rooting for the underdog. You want him to win. Well, how do you do the sequel? Well, you gotta recreate them being the underdog. Oh, now he's washed up. Now he's no longer a legend. Now, and it's like that's the best you could come up with for the sequel. Like you gotta erase what he's done and put him at the bottom to start over. And they do the same thing with Ghostbusters.
I
They're
hate to say, but we're going to be talking about 90s films in some time now. The next
yeah.
time would be do the same bullshit, same mistakes. Like, we're just going to delete all the accomplishments of the hero, reset them back to one. We're going to continue from here.
They always
We'll,
got to
we'll,
do this. I hate
yeah.
it. Look, you can say that things haven't gone great for them, but that's what I mean by the poison pill. They don't just start them at the beginning. They lower their station or they change the character. Like the bandit is depressed through most of Smokey and the Bandit 2. Remember him in the first film? Like he was crazy and he was fun and the snowman and Fred and actually snowman's about the same in the movie. But like
Yeah.
everything has this dark tone to it because he's not the same character and it's like shouldn't he be at least the same character? What if he, what if he was trying to outrun debt collectors? What if that was part of the story? That could be fun. Oh, he's got to pay off this horrible debt. You can still throw darker aspects in and retain who the character is. He's not the same character. He even kicks down a door to get a gas station attendant who calls him an asshole. Like, that's not the Smokey and the
Not the
Bandit I
same
wanted to
thing.
see. Yeah, it's not the
No.
same. And Ghostbusters 2, okay, it's cartoony, it's lighter, maybe I'm overreaching just a tad, but I still think it's the same thing.
I'm not defending
You,
Ghostbusters, right? So like Ghostbusters 2 definitely had to respond to the reality, which I don't think Smokey and Bandit had to, but they did respond to the reality of the real Ghostbusters, the cartoon series, right? they had to respond to the
To a
popularity at that
degree.
point.
Do you
They,
understand what happened there,
yeah.
by the way? Are you? Because I know a lot of people
I
aren't
mean,
familiar.
I'm aware of the influence to a degree and the back and forthness. If you want to go into more detail, I'm just speaking it from a high level that it affected the story. You know, but if you have other feedback or ideas there, I would say let you go and add to it. My thought was that they just don't have. They just wanted to create something that was more appropriate for children in most ways.
I don't
And they,
disagree. I think that's
yeah,
part of the problem.
yeah.
But most people don't know because this is not widely known unless you
No,
are a big Ghostbusters fan, and you are. And the cartoon series, there was a whole legal battle when they made Ghostbusters. They didn't even know if they could call it Ghostbusters. They actually filmed. You can find the footage on YouTube where they shoot several scenes like, we're the Ghost Breakers. We're ready to believe, and they recorded.
you're referring to the whole cartoon debacle with the ape and the car and all that
Well, that's
stuff. With
part
the,
of it.
yeah.
That's part of it. That's where I'm saying this is going. People don't understand why the second movie changed because of the cartoon. So in the first film, they didn't even know if they were going to get to call the movie Ghostbusters. Well, we know they did. We don't have to go into that part of it. So you come to the sequel, and what had happened is the popularity of Ghostbusters was huge. And so they couldn't get a movie out right away because they couldn't get Bill Murray on board very quickly. The components were everywhere, so they made a cartoon. Now, the cartoon, for legal reasons, had another name, The Real Ghostbusters. And the premise of the cartoon is that the movies were movies about them. In other words, the real Ghostbusters are literally the real Ghostbusters, and Bill Murray and Dan Aykroyd are playing them in the movie. So you've already got a weird component in the mix. Kids fell in love with this thing, and the first Ghostbusters is a very adult movie. So now kids want to go see Ghostbusters. They want to see Slimer because he's a main character in the freaking TV show. So, like you said, they kiddified it. And I don't think a lot of people understand how that worked. I know a lot of people always said to me, why is it called Real Ghostbusters?
It's gotten
Because
worse.
they're real.
So, like, just to be clear, like, you can clearly see the evolution of real Ghostbusters. Like, it's obvious in the new movies. We're not in the new movies conversation, but like, it's clear.
Well, it's become
Oh,
bigger,
yeah.
right? Like, there was a weird thing in the 80s I think most people are aware of now because there's tons of YouTube videos on it. But it's about how there would, like, be these R-rated movies, and they went on a weird path where they would go R-rated, then they'd go down to a PG, then they might be a television series, and then they became an animated series. You got Conan as an animated series. The Barbarian. You've got RoboCop. You have Highlander. You remember where you have to cut the other person's head off? You had the Toxic Freaking Avenger, which was unrated. It was essentially an X-rated.
Well, even the Turtles film were based on very hard R concepts in comic books or TV shows. They were pretty like the Turtles were pretty hard R,
Oh
weren't
yeah,
they?
I don't know about hard R, but they would be called maybe a soft R or a hard PG-13. I think is the way. They were more adult.
Yeah, more adult. I mean, to be fair, the movie in the early '90s for Turtles was definitively correct.
But the Turtles
Tone-wise.
were created
Yeah.
for a movie as a product. Whereas what I'm talking about was a phenomenon where they would soft pedal R-rated material into something for kids. I mean, I'm talking about something very specific here.
They did it for Aliens. They did it for, like you said,
Yes.
for RoboCop. They did it for
Yeah.
Terminator. They did it for basically everything that was potentially really good, because they knew 10 years later that would be their audience. They'd be
Yeah.
old enough to enjoy it.
Well,
They knew their
they could make
audience.
products. They could
Well, they
make
could make
more
movies.
products. Well, yes, they could make movies, but the products are always where the money is at. Because, like, with Disney, I remember hearing the story of that movie Frozen, let it go, let it go.
Yeah.
They actually made more money on selling the princess outfit. I don't know, is it Elsie or Elsa? Forgive me, everybody, I didn't watch it.
But the evil
The Ice
witch lady
Queen.
who's the
The
Ice
Ice
Queen.
Queen.
Yeah,
Yeah. Well,
whatever.
she's not
Yeah.
evil. She's not evil. I know that much. But anyway, they sold. She's not
not
evil.
good. She's not good.
All right, fine. You wouldn't date her. I got it. You wouldn't take her home to meet mom. So they made a dress.
No.
They made more money on that dress than they did the movie. And that's always been the mentality. And Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles was a comic made as a joke initially. It was a parody of Daredevil, and it just took off in a way nobody saw coming. So when the studio bought it as a movie, they knew what they were getting. They just wrote a better movie than anybody expected.
So let's look at it from this perspective. Like, if you can take a heroic character who's a R-rated character, let's say RoboCop or Terminator, right? You can make them, because they weren't bad guys by the end of their run. They started to push them as, like RoboCop was never a villain.
Yeah, I was gonna say
Uh,
RoboCop was never
yeah,
a villain, so
never a villain. And Terminator became a hero, right?
by two, yeah.
Yeah, by two. So by the time it mattered, in a lot of ways, parents who grew up with this stuff, right, who were having children then, like they were not they really I don't they weren't bad role models in a weird way. Like they were honest. They were like they couldn't be fallible, right? Like the RoboCop couldn't be failed. Like he couldn't be a bad guy. It wasn't possible, right?
I'm just
Like
imagining Terminator doing an anti-drug commercial in my head. All of a sudden, like,
that
don't
would
do
be
drugs, kids. I'll go
no,
back in time and kill your parents.
exactly. And then Terminator, the T-800 at least, literally by the sequel was so like you almost had an organic process for those characters from RoboCop to Terminator. Like they are literal heroes that set forth good, even though they're violent as all get out. I'm not
Well,
questioning that, but like,
there's something I just want to forgive
yeah,
me. I don't remember a Terminator cartoon from
toy.
Saturday morning. Oh, there was
No, but
toys. There were toys,
toys.
but there.
I'm referring to toys.
Okay,
Yeah, yeah.
RoboCop had a animated series. It had a
Yes,
TV
RoboCop did.
show. It had an animated series. Right.
But we agree that generally speaking, like these things that were villainous or bad, or even violent or vile when we were younger, they eventually become our heroes as the children evolve to adults in sequels. It's weird. Things that were
Mm,
villains or bad, like RoboCop's
I don't think it
unique.
was about being a hero. I think it was about making money off a product that parents wouldn't allow them to have otherwise.
But you had to have a hero. You couldn't have a villain, right? You couldn't have a bad guy. Do you know of a bad guy that became
Not a bad guy,
sold?
but here's the problem: the ones I would
Hmm.
cite never became toys. Like you can't say Snake Plissken and Max from Mad Max are heroes; they're anti-heroes. But then again, they never made toy lines or cartoons out of either of them. So I can't think of one. I can't disagree with you because off the top of my head, you had a few. Like in comic books, some of the villains on Cobra's side turned to good guys, right? There was Storm Shadow, who it turned out
Well, even
he wasn't
Transformers
evil.
world, about like in general,
Yeah,
Hasbro world,
Transformers. There's a good
yeah,
one. Yeah,
yeah.
but just to wrap up the angle, the Ghostbusters, and you have to kind of know where the '80s was coming from, and toys were exploding. It wasn't just Star Wars. Star Wars stumbled on something. Okay, George Lucas like fumbled his way into something that no one saw coming, and everybody
He did
wanted a
good.
piece of that.
He did good.
He did great, but I'm saying
Yeah.
no one saw this coming, and so they would look if they could have made Jason Voorhees a Saturday morning cartoon, they would have. You know what I mean? They would have if they could have, but it just didn't happen. But you did have Toxic Avenger in those, and like you said, it's probably because they were more heroic characters. RoboCop, Rambo. I mean, Rambo's dark, but ultimately, Rambo became a hero. You
The
know.
heroes that would protect a child, right?
Oh,
The
definitely.
heroes that,
Oh,
that would be like
definitely.
the highlight.
Yeah.
I think that's the key element. If you think your hero would protect a child, that even if they're doing bad, if they can do good later, they're not a bad of a thing, right?
Well,
I
but
mean,
see,
I'm
back to
yeah.
Ghostbusters, like that's not. They weren't making heroes per se. They were just dulling down. I mean, not to be vulgar, but the first film has a blowjob joke. Okay, it just factually does. There is nothing like that in the second film. Like
It's not
the
fact. It's visually on screen practically.
oh
So
gosh, you know exactly what's happening in that scene, and
he's
there's
got a
some
great smile. Yep.
yeah, and if you look at like some of the other jokes in that movie, if you some of the language, it's definitely closer to that SNL irreverence that was popular from Caddyshack to Fletch to other movies. It was embedded in that film, and so I'm agreeing with you in the second film. They were like, hey, let's aim it more at kids. We'll sell more tickets and we can make more products.
I gotta
And
say one stupid thing about that sequel. If they're smart enough to bring back our villain, make him a hero as a ghost,
who are we
that will
talking
be
about? Which villain?
the sequel. So we've got the
So
painting. I'm
Gozer?
blanking on.
Gozer should have been the villain.
No,
I
no,
mean,
no,
good, good
no. This
guy?
no sequel.
Well, that's Vigo.
Vigo, yes. So if Vigo comes back, and they can make him not a villain in a sequel and a hero, and then part of the story going forward, and then have him somehow be redeemed, that will be the most epic thing they could do for Ghostbuster fans and for the longevity of the series will be to bring an actual major villain from death back and then be a hero and then be a supporting character to their storyline like a Slimer. We need that. We need a ghost that is literally truly powerful to be a friend and not be a villain anymore. We need to fix that in that storyline, I think.
I'm not going to greenlight this film, Darren. I'm sorry. I don't
Well,
want Vegan the
everyone,
good guy. I don't.
if everyone
I
everyone
want.
thought Vigo was gonna fight whatchamacallit, the freeze guy in the last film was gonna come out and fight him and become a straight up ghost to ghost, power for power combat, like an actual
Which I'm
like
not
bring
against that.
Vigo back.
I just don't want Vigo. Look, I'm going to agree with you and disagree with you. I've
Yeah.
always wanted Vigo back. I always thought
Yes.
Vigo was underused, and we never got to see the true potential of Vigo in the second movie. I'd love to have Vigo back. I don't want a good guy Vigo. I don't
I
want
want
that.
I want an
I,
anti-hero Vigo.
okay,
Is that
an
yeah,
anti-hero I'll accept if he has his
yeah.
own motivation and he comes out because the new movie sucked. I'm just gonna say it. I'm sorry if people
They're
liked it.
they're
I
not that
hated
good.
Frozen Empire. I hated it.
Well, the previous one was even, I think, actually worse in a lot of ways.
I
Now
don't
I
care.
enjoyed it. It wasn't Frozen Empire was terrible.
It's like comparing
So,
what's a better death suicide. Like, is it hanging or strychnine? You know what I mean? They're
but if
both
they
bad.
had
I don't.
Vigo show up and
It would
stop
have been something.
Bad Ghost, it'd be
Yeah.
like, okay, this is my territory. We're
Right.
gonna fight, and then we could deal with this. The fact that Vigo like understood something and deal with it in a later movie as a
Sort of
whole
like a Doctor
thing.
Doom is what I think you're going for. Where
Yeah, we need that big, powerful bad guy ghost that's not completely nefarious. Like that doesn't make any like no ghost wants to like, destroy the whole world. Like Vico of all people, like I still need my humans to respect me and worship me and
can I go into
exist.
a point here then?
Yeah,
Because I think
yeah,
we're going
yeah.
into the next part of this conversation.
Fair
And
enough.
that is now what you're talking about is the necessity of sequels. If you look at the original Ghostbusters, the ghosts are not people. For the most part, they're just called ghosts. They're saying the
The
dead are coming back, but they are not people. There is no
residual energy,
reference.
I think is what they describe it as, like
Well, but I'm saying they're
residual.
not
Yeah,
forms of people. We don't have. This was John so and so, and he's been haunting the dock since the day. You know what I mean? They're formless. There's a
they started out with the
librarian,
sequel
sort
with the
of.
whole ghost and the Caselli
Well,
brothers or
hold
whatever.
on. You're
Yeah,
jumping gun
yeah.
on me. I'm talking
Okay,
the
go
first
ahead.
film. The
Fair
first
enough.
film, there is no real human entity tied to them. Like you have a librarian, but they don't have a story about a librarian that died there. It's just an entity that looks like a librarian. You see a ghost go up the tailpipe of a taxi, but now for some reason it's a physical zombie. And I've heard people debate, is it a physical zombie? Did it turn a cab driver into a zombie? We don't know.
You
So,
don't
in
know.
other
Yep.
words, it wasn't important who the ghosts were. It was they were the villains. That's it. They were the villains, period. There is nothing about them to indicate this was mom, dad, or uncle. If they were ever human, I think the idea is that they are life forces of evil people because they're all evil. Because, the good people all went to heaven, right? And so these are all the villains, the dead villains come back to life of time, or just selfish people, greedy, whatever you want. But they don't
Or
get
John
into it.
Belushi.
Well, John Belushi's supposed to be essentially Slimer, but that's a whole other. Again, that's a whole other thing. But now you go, we got to do sequels. Well, now what do you have to do a sequel? Well, you've got to expand the lore, and you have to introduce some sort of lore because if you don't, you have nothing to build on, right? Is that a fair statement? You can't just have generic, this is just villains. Fair? I'm asking.
I don't think that they're. I don't. Yes, to be clear, yes, you need to have some clear definity. I
Well,
don't.
there's got to
I
be some
think that
rules.
I don't know that Ghostbusters and even Alien, to be clear, Terminator, all these films that had sequels that were very good, generally speaking. Let's say I'm not going to say Aliens was bad or Terminator 2 was
Well, it's not
obviously
bad,
not bad,
but they
and then
expanded the lore.
Ghostbuster 2, but they never left it off saying it's over, right? Even Ghostbusters, the
Well,
original,
no.
didn't
If
leave
there's
it off.
ghosts, if there were ghosts before and there are ghosts now, there can be ghosts again. That's not what I'm
I think
talking about. I'm
I think
talking
they
about
failed
lore.
at continuing the lore. I agree with you. They failed there at continuing the lore. There was no lapse for these other films. No, like we missed something. Like Ghostbusters, like we solved it. And then we didn't answer like how do we get to go from Gozer? Gozer is equal to Vigo? Like that doesn't seem exactly the same, right? Like you
Well,
know what
they're
I mean? Like
comedies, and
yeah.
comedies always get a slight pass, right? You can do. There's only one rule of any comedy: make me laugh. You make people laugh, they'll forgive a multitude of cinematic sins.
I think that
But
to be fair,
Ghostbusters
the
has a little bit
Ghostbusters is
more.
way beyond.
Well,
Way
I don't
beyond.
know about way beyond, but
Yeah.
it's the reason it works so well is it has likable characters. It works in New York, like New York is a character in them, and
Yeah.
so you have more going on, so you don't get bored. If you're getting bored with the ghost stuff, you go to some comedy. If you're getting bored with the comedy, you start throwing in just little character pieces, little moments. You got Janine. Janine's a lot of fun. So it's a lot of distraction, to be
Well, if you
honest.
look at movies that are like, so I think this complements your statement. So, like, literally, if you look at movies like Back to the Future or Jaws, like, they don't have even the sequels. I'm not saying Jaws is perfect, obviously, sequel, but they don't have those trying to do over the top. We're going to continue the comedy element. They're just trying to continue the story where it left off and maintain generally the style. If you look at
Well,
Ghostbusters versus Ghostbusters 2, the style and tone is kind of different in a lot of ways.
Well, could I
You,
finish the original point just for a moment?
yeah,
I'm sorry. I
yeah.
just don't want to
No,
go off on three tangents before I finished the initial
come back.
idea.
Yeah,
So I said
yeah,
lore, but there's a thing in characters I call the elasticity of storytelling. Spider Man and Batman are two of the best examples I've ever come across. Spider Man is a character that the elasticity, in other words, how far can you take the story out, is limited. Why? Because we are following Peter Parker. The story is not Spider Man, the story is Peter Parker. And he's downtrodden. He has life to overcome as well as villains to battle. And when then these two things intersect, that's when Peter's most miserable, right? So you can only go so far. You hope he ends up with MJ. You hope nothing happens to his aunt. You hope someday Peter Parker can find happiness. And the problem is if you want the story to continue, you can never allow Peter Parker to find happiness. So your elasticity only goes so far. That's why Spider-Man's been rebooted in the comics and in the movies. He can only go so far because people are not that interested in adult Peter Parker, and they're certainly not interested in seeing a miserable adult Peter Parker. Batman, on the other hand, the elasticity goes way farther because you can write any crime story, pick Batman up, and just drop him into it. Because you understand who Batman is, what Batman is, and what he represents. All you have to do is write good villains, a good heist. You know what I mean? The story itself is what you have to develop, and you just drop Batman right in the middle of it. Ghostbusters, I think, is a limited property. If you look at the first film, where do you go with it? You know, I think the line about franchise opportunities, the sequel maybe should have been about another branch of the Ghostbusters, if we're honest. But will people go see something that doesn't have Bill and Dan and, you know what I mean, all of them back?
they
So,
won't. Yeah.
right. So you got to, that's what I mean by now you got to increase your lore. You got to have some more rules. Like, what do they invent in the second movie? Well, now they've got like a negative slime that they positively charge and they can use it for them. They have different weapons. They have a different villain. I don't know if it'll ever be a good franchise, is my point. Like, without doing some drastic changes. Does that make sense when I'm talking about, like, where you can only take these characters so far? Where can you take Vinkman? Let me ask you that. Where can you take Vinkman as a character?
Well, you're saying like what you, uh, I think you just would continue where you left off. You go back to when it was good. Let him
So
continue to
he's
tell the
just
story.
funny. That's it, right?
Well, not the funny. Like we wanted to like
No, I mean
be
as a
fair.
character, he is just a funny character.
He is, but we
He's
didn't
not
get to
a
see the
fleshed out.
payoff of his whole arc. Like there was no
There is
arc.
no
In the,
arc. That's my
yeah,
point.
yeah.
That's exactly what I'm saying. Is other characters, if you put an arc, Peter Parker is designed to have an arc, but they never allow it to finish.
Well, they don't even let it start. To be fair,
Well, he
like
finds Mary Jane that could possibly be happy, but he's always denied that happiness. So it only
they
goes about a quarter of the way, and then they have to hit the restart, right?
we can get super complicated in that, but I think that they've proven that that Peter Parker itself storyline does not matter who Peter Parker like doesn't the story doesn't matter.
It
It
does
just
matter.
matters the
I'm going to
story.
disagree. Look,
Yeah.
Star Wars. Who's the main character of Star Wars? The original Star Wars.
Luke
Yes.
Skywalker.
Now,
Yeah.
who's the two supporting characters, but they have important roles? Who are they?
Um, Han Solo.
And
I prefer Chewie. I'm sorry.
okay,
I don't.
but you know it's Princess Leia is what I'm aiming for.
Whatever.
Okay,
She
not
don't
Han
do that
Solo's
much.
dog. All right, I'm not aiming
Yeah.
for Han Solo's dog. So,
So
now let's
yeah.
look at what I'm saying with Peter Parker versus Star Wars and Ghostbusters also. Now, Luke Skywalker, farm boy, dreams of adventure. He ends up on it, right? Would you agree Luke has an arc, and by the end of the third movie, the arc is complete?
No.
No.
I think the arc is.
All
I think the
right.
arc is
We're gonna get
90%.
we're gonna get an argument here.
No,
You
I
don't
think
think the story that was started in Star Wars is completed by
I think
third
the
film?
I think it's complete. I think that his ambitions are not complete. I think the story is complete.
What was
I
left
think
hanging in what was presented? Not something you make up. What is left from the presented in the films that is not answered by the third film?
the future of the
That's
Jedi.
the future. You can't. That's nebulous.
But it's
We're talking
clear
about
that
the
he wants-
Empire. They were only against the Empire.
So there's nothing left at that point. I think that in fact his biggest issue that we don't want to deal with is his father-dad death thing.
Everybody,
like,
just so you
very
know,
brief.
Darren and I fight all the time,
Yeah.
so don't think we're mad at each other.
We're not. But my
Mommy and
point is that
Daddy
he
are
didn't-
just
he didn't-
fighting. All right.
He didn't deal with. He never dealt with that. It just was over suddenly, and he
well,
didn't deal with the future of being.
Here's the problem.
like,
I was hoping
yeah.
you would just say yes because the story is over. That doesn't
Story
mean
is
you can't
technically-
start another story, all right? I'm not
okay,
saying that.
the
I'm saying
arc-
what you started in Star Wars, was it finished in Return of the Jedi? I don't
Yes.
think it's
What
that
you
hard
started
to
is
say.
finished. That yes, in theory it was finished. I'm just
That
saying
doesn't mean it can't
Luke's-
continue.
Luke's story wasn't finished. Is all I'm saying. The
Okay,
story
all
of
right.
the 3 episodes, the 3 were finished. Luke's story wasn't finished. I think that everyone else was done. I don't think that Han wanted to be a part of it. I don't think that.
Well,
Leia
Han
wanted to
didn't
be
even
part
have a
of
good
it.
story in Return of the Jedi, and everyone agrees on that one. Like,
Yeah, they wanted to be done with it. I
I'll
think
say
that
something
Luke-
ghoulish. I think they should have killed Princess Leia in the third film, and I'll
that
tell
would've
you
been
why.
great.
Because, well, not because it's the girl. Here's why. I have a legitimate reason, and that is in any war story when you have that much violence, right? That's all death, right? That's what adventure is in those films. It's me shooting them before they shoot me, and war has a price, and the problem with Return of the Jedi is there's no real price. Our hero never pays a major price. In fact, he wins everything. They defeat the Empire,
He
and
loses
he
his
turns
father,
his
in
father. Well, no,
theory.
he gains his father back, though. He returns his father to the good side of the. Remember, everybody says you can't do that, and he wins. He wins. Now, would he have rather his father been alive? Sure, but come on, let's be honest. The Thanksgiving dinner would have been awkward, you know. So, the guy blew away Leia's entire planet. But my point again is that Luke wins. He turns his father over. There's some melancholy, but there's no price paid. And I think because the price always has to be something that affects everybody. And who affects everybody in the Star Wars universe? It's Leia. Leia's connected to both Han and Luke and the rebellion, right?
It would be a big reason for her to for him to switch because Leia being dead would have been a huge angst in the back of.
That would have if she had been dead. And
Yeah.
let's say the Emperor killed, because if you have Vader kill her, I think we're gonna have a bigger problem.
You can't
But
have
let's
Vader.
say-
Vader would never kill her. Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
So she gets killed. Emperor's behind it. Now Luke is ready to turn to the dark side, and you have a price that's paid for all this violence. That's why I think everybody says, "Oh, Han should have died." Why? Why? What does Han was a smuggler? He doesn't. The only person he'd really affect is Luke and Leia, but he wouldn't affect the rebellion, and the universe wouldn't give two craps. But you kill Leia, who was a symbol. Well, that would have been a hell
It
of
would
a
have
price.
affected Darth Vader. That's
Oh,
all
it
that
would have
matters.
affected, and you could have used that for his turn at the end too. Luke's calling out to him, "Father, Father." Leia's dead. This is the last remnant of his line. See, that's what I'm talking about: storytelling and arcs. And so we went off on a tangent, but we're going to do that a lot, people. That's the point of the show. We can talk about whatever we want, but you have a story, and it goes somewhere, and it makes sense. Whereas you
Organically.
go to
Yep.
organically, you go to Ghostbusters, there is no where to go. The whole thing is these schlubby guys start a business. That's Ghostbusters. That's it. That's the entirety. So the sequel, if anything, if they wanted a franchise, they should have been setting up the lore better, and they simply didn't.
The funniest part is they had the lore. They had the real Ghostbusters. They had
But they had to keep
all
them
that.
separate at that time. Remember, there
I
were
know
legal
that's
problems.
so stupid.
Yeah.
That's their whole problem. Is they had all the lore, all the creators were all putting all their investment into that. They threw it all away. So
Yeah, and that's
I,
the thing about sequels
no,
is where do you go? Like it's like, okay, you have them do the same thing and they're still funny and wacky and woohoo, but that only goes so far because comedy is based in surprise. Like you've got to shock people. That's why they laugh, right? You hear something you didn't
yes.
expect. Well, if you're familiar with the way Vinkman talks, that sarcasm is only going to go so far.
Well, his sarcasm is pure gold.
Well, it's
Usually,
Bill Murray,
yeah.
so that's, come on, let's be fair here. That's bringing out the canon, right? But if you look at how this film was made, it's a miracle it was good. Like seriously, it is.
I think it's a lot
And
of fun for us as audiences. I think the one thing people don't like you're saying it was good, but the fact that we enjoy it is shocking.
no, not
Because
that
they
we
had
enjoy it, that it became
yeah,
enjoyable. You got to go watch the making ofs. There's several
no,
of them, and the film was cursed. The film had nothing but problems. Special effects that didn't work. Script was being rewritten. There are entire sequences cut out of the film that that montage when they talk to like Larry King and stuff. Those sequences that you see, including the BJ, that was a whole scene at a castle. Him and
it's made up.
Winston, yeah, they went to a castle, and they had to spend the night there to catch ghosts. And so that scene where he gets that wasn't a dream like in the finished version now. That actually happened to him, but the
It's a
scene
bigger
didn't
scene.
work.
Yeah, it's a
Yeah,
bigger scene.
it didn't
Yeah.
work, so they cut it up and just left it in as a dream sequence. And actually, I think it works better. So good editing, not unlike Star Wars, saved that movie. But that doesn't mean you can't make a good sequel. My question remains: where do you go? All these sequels have to answer that question. Where do you go when you have a character that wasn't meant to? Smokey and the Bandit is not a deep movie. You'll agree
Well,
with that, I hope.
I think that we're gonna talk more about Smoking the Bat in the future, and Back to the Future, and Jaws probably in the future. We're gonna have to have a conversation about just those films. First film is very good.
Well,
And a
look
lot
at the
of fun.
third film. Look where they went with that. Like we don't even have to
Yeah.
cover that because it's not good. It's
Uh,
watchable. Weirdly,
it's
there's a weird
it's
watchable
missing
nature to it.
people, and
Well,
that
it's
yeah,
missing a
it's.
lot.
I think the biggest issue with most of the films nowadays is that they just don't have a plan for the future, so they try to do the easiest out to make money. I think we're seeing that in the historical parts. I think that maybe Bill Murray's smart to know that, and I think maybe he pushed back enough to save things. Like the fact that Ghostbusters 2 is so good might be because of Bill Murray in some ways pushing back against it. I don't think that in a lot of ways, like even for Star Wars, they didn't know what they were doing. They made one film to make money. Maybe it was going to work. Maybe it wasn't. They were selling the goose on it. They had no plan for sequels. The same
No,
thing is true for Back to the Future, uh, Terminator, RoboCop. Well, clearly RoboCop. They kind of started figuring it out, but there was no plan. So they kind of did what they could, what they had. Nowadays, the problem is that so many movies are so planning on the future, which we got to talk about, and what they're going to do next, that the movie themselves, the movie they're trying to make today, right now, is bad. because it's trying to fit into a bubble for the future. And I think that's the biggest problem. I'd rather have a bad sequel that's okay because the first film was a good movie than have a bad first movie that has a sequel that's just really bad, really terrible, right? It's not going to be better.
Okay.
You need a good first film. Anyway,
I'll give you
that's
the
my
last
summary.
word on that. I'll give you the last word because I'm just saying it's interesting when you look at the history of film and you look at a TV
Yeah,
series and you watch a comedy TV series like let's say Scrubs, okay,
for
and
sure.
you continue through multiple episodes of the first season and multiple episodes of the second season, and they're all just sequels, right? They're continuation of the
Same,
story,
same,
same
same. Yep.
structure, jokes, and yet it can work. But yet you can't get one good sequel out of a comedy, or it's rarer. Let's put it that way, where you have something that's better than or at least equal to. I've always found that fascinating, and I guess
I
it comes down to writing. It comes down to the opposite. Ghostbusters was up against a lot of opposition. Maybe the irritation created that pearl. Ghostbusters
I
2 didn't have that.
I agree. I think that we could talk about the films in general that were really good, right? The ones, the films and the TV shows. I think that just looking back, the ones that I personally are rewatching is like Sequest. I want to rewatch Airwolf. A lot of weird shows, Knight Rider, things that were very good back in the day. They would never have a movie. I know that Knight Rider did or whatever, but the point is like
Well, that's
they
a
never had
pilot.
it.
We don't count that.
Yeah,
That's different.
yeah. But my point is that the storytelling is was at a different level and wasn't planned out that well, and they worked better back in the day when they were trying to just do the best they could with what they had. And the same thing is true with all Star Trek. And they had a vision. I think Star Wars didn't have a vision. They had
He
a
did, but
small
he changed
Bible,
it. He kept changing it, I think. So
kept
I think you're
changing it.
right. I think you're right. It's the same result, right? He
Yeah,
didn't
it's
stick to the
just
original
rough.
vision, so he was just changing it as he went.
So we had that whole problem. I think that we're not going to change that, but hopefully we can discuss that with all of you out there and give you some insight into some ideas what we think is what's happened. And hopefully we bring some films like Timescape to you that you maybe haven't watched. Maybe you haven't seen
Well,
Timescape.
we can
So
start at the episode. I think the beginning of every episode, we could recommend one or two movies
yeah,
because
we
the
could
whole
talk
point of
about
this is, you know what? I think I have a title for the show. I think I have a
yeah.
title. Non Sequitur, the movie. There we go.
Ah,
There's no point. We're just rambling.
we'll just say non sequitur. I think
Okay, so
non
just
sweat.
non sequitur.
Yeah, I don't. We'll figure it out, everyone. You can vote on it on
You can
Twitter
vote
or
on it. Hey,
X.
give us some ideas.
Yeah.
Give us some ideas. Put them in the comments and whatever you want, because we're just going to talk about whatever we want to talk about, and we're going to do it off the cuff. And maybe we'll do some more focused things. One thing I'd like to do is maybe pick a movie, you and I watch it, and just talk as we
Yeah.
watch it, like about whatever we want. But when we watched Back to the Future 2, you and I.
Well, that's
And
a long conversation for
but that
that
was
one.
fun,
Yeah.
and we had fun talking about it, and I think we could do that too. So we're not gonna be a news channel. We're just gonna be whatever we want to talk about. Darren, this was fun. I enjoyed this.
Yeah, we said we were going to do this for a while and have a conversation with just ad hoc and just make up stuff as we go. This works better than trying to be so structured. We need to do this. I think
It didn't
hopefully
work.
the people, huh?
It
No.
did when we were trying to be structured.
Yeah, we just need like just bullshit and it's good. I think the
Okay.
bullshit works good. Everyone told us just you guys just talk and make up stuff. I think we with like a fraction of an idea to start it off.
Because there's
I
so many
think
places you can go. There's so many things you can
yeah.
talk about. I
I
didn't
think we
intend to
pulled it
talk
off.
about Time After Time, but it came
Yeah,
out.
well, I gotta watch that. We'll talk about that more.
You've got to see Time After Time.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm calling
Sure.
that a must.
We did this. This was a lot of fun. We did what we were supposed to do a long time ago, and it's like you guys should just do this thing. It's like, well, we didn't know each other 4 or 5 years ago that well. Now we do, so
No.
we can just hang out and chat.
No,
So
this works a lot better, I think.
yeah, it's
So
what they were like. This is gonna be great, you guys. You guys gotta do this thing. It's like, well, eventually, I guess. But I think that people were right, and
weirdly,
uh,
they were. You guys don't know. They forced us to do this. They were like, "You guys should do a podcast together," and we're like, okay, sure."
I do want to give one send off though. I want to give a lot of thanks and appreciation to someone who's not with us because I think we can
Oh,
add that
I'm
because
a
I think she
yes.
pushed hard. I think I want to say a lot of thanks to Fluffy who's not with us, and she was magnanimous, ridiculous, whatever you want to call it, about us doing this. And we tried early on, didn't quite work the way we wanted it to, but now it does. And she wasn't wrong, and I want to say thank you. She's not here with us anymore, but she was totally correct, and I think we will make sure that that's an ongoing appreciation for her and the group around her. Even if we want to give some people a hard time, but she was she was definitely a champion behind us doing this. So
Well,
thank you, and we'll
Gina,
keep doing
that
it.
was her real
So
name, Gina, and God
yep,
bless you wherever you are. We love you. We miss you. And I couldn't agree more with everything Darren just said. A lot of good people met each other through Fluffy, and we're all still friends, which is wild. I mean, some other people on the peripheral have fallen away, but I think the core group has never broke up, and that's because of Fluffy. That's because of our Gina. So with that, I think we're gonna call it a night. We'll be back in a week, hopefully, and who knows what we're gonna talk about? Because we sure don't. Good night, everybody.
cheers.